Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, for those of you who remember 2011, these two amazing books written by my guest today, co-written by my guest today, is Brent Adamson, The Challenger, Sale and the Challenger Customer, foundational in sales, and they continue to be now into 2023. So delighted to share the podcast interview I had with Brent Adamson, who's currently the Global Head of Research, Advisory, and Communities at Ecosystems. And we all know him from Gartner and, of course, co-author of The Challenger. And he also now has shorter breakdowns of his message in Brent's breakdowns. So usually 5 or 6 minutes, really great tactical insights that he shares. So wealth of knowledge. But what we really talked about today is we broke down, the buyer's journey and how we need to show up as salespeople to help them navigate the internal complexities of their own organization, but also just making a decision. And what can we do to help them make a decision? And what we ended up coming up with is people are just really tired. They have a lot on their plate in their personal life and their professional life. And how can we differentiate? Because right now, they're in their eyes, it's the blue logo versus the red logo. But if we can show up and we can take something off their plate, make their decision easier, make them feel good about themselves, see something in themselves, that's a differentiator. And it just creates some levity, but it helps them deal with things they don't want to deal with. And so, as excited we are about our product and our solution, what it means to our prospect, it's work, it's change management, it's coming together with a committee with 12 to 13 other people when sometimes we have competing priorities. Sometimes we're tasked to sit on this committee. We don't really want to be there. And so how as salespeople can we create an experience, make a difference for them and guide them along this journey? And the example he shared was, we can chalk the lines on the pitch, which I like that, to create the structure. But then we have to guide them along and really co-create what that looks like so that there's accountability and there's ownership on both sides, that we're hearing each other's voice, we're sharing, we're collaborating. And it makes for, an experience that's different because most people are coming in and they're pitching and they're making it all about themselves. And what we summed it up with is just show up the way you would with a friend and just be a good person, be a good human. And, I think, the bar is almost low, but it's not these fancy tactics and things to manipulate and hide. It's just be real. Show up and be real and offer to help them. And one of the areas he talked about is really aligning our solution to a higher objective or corporate initiative that they're working on. And the 5 areas he suggested to focus on are, the objective. And then within that, the tactics, the metrics, the targets, and the timelines. And when you have a group of 13 people, each of these represents an opportunity to gain consensus, ask questions, and move forward to eventually, you've explored the entire opportunity. So highly encourage you to listen, whether you're a sales rep, a business owner, or sales leader. Let us know what you've implemented and what results you yielded as a result of that. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, encourage you to subscribe. Send us a review. Love to know. Love to get some feedback. So again, we can get greater visibility and attract amazing guests such as Brent Adamson. So hope you enjoy the podcast, and we'll see you next time. Okay, for those who are watching this, I had the pleasure of reading these growing through my sales rep in medical devices, thanks to our sales leader who brought them in. And I'm delighted and honored to welcome one of the co-authors, Brent Adamson, to the podcast. So Brent, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to see you, Karen. It's kind of hard to hear. Like when I was coming up, when I was so young, I read these books because I wasn't young when I wrote them. So I don't know what that makes me, apparently a dinosaur, but I'm glad you found them valuable back in the day. That's awesome.
Well, I wasn't young there either, but you know what the irony is, and I wrote a few points here down, is some of the, um, obviously a lot of the themes still stand true today. One just particular on top of mine was the three T's. Teach a tailored message while taking control. I think that's we always need to be teaching. So, um, anyway, thank you for being here. Want to talk today, Brent, and get your expertise. Really starting off, if you think about big picture, the buyer's journey. And, a lot of times when I'm engaging with companies and I ask them, how familiar are you with the way in which your buyers buy? No hands go up, but they're very familiar with their internal sales process. And most often there's a gap. So what are you seeing in terms of the awareness of the way in which our buyers buy from the sales rep standpoint?
Well, from sales, I think you're right. I think from the sales side, it's still kind of oh, right, that's a good question. We should probably consider that. It's interesting though, when you talk to their colleagues down the virtual hall in marketing about that, they'll say, no, duh, we've been working on that for the last 15 years, right? So marketers will tell you that, mapping the customer buying journey. Although I get this old riff, but I haven't tried this riff out in a while, but I still love it, which is if you ask a marketer about mapping the customer's buyer journey or buying journey, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we do that." And you say, "Oh really? Tell me more." And they'll say, "Yeah, it's 4 stages. It's awareness, consideration, preference, and purchase, right?" And they'll say, "That's the customer's buying journey. How hard could it be?" And then you stop and think about, okay, what do you mean by that? So awareness of whom? Well, awareness of us and our brand and our solutions and our product. And then it's like, well, consideration of whom? It's like, well, of us, and preference for us. And right. So it's like, oh, so you haven't actually mapped the customer's buying journey either. What you've mapped is the customer buying from us journey, right? Which
Yeah.
is like, this is very different. But this is a fun footnote. But I think if we were to ever get sales reps to think really deeply about the customer buying journey, they would probably ultimately come to the realization, and maybe they're already there. Maybe this is why they don't do it, Karen, because I think what they come to is a realization that customers don't know their buying journey, right? So to say that we should map the customer's buying journey is presumptive of the fact that there is a known buying journey to map in the first place. And that's actually where I part company with most people who talk about journey mapping in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And just to back it up to when you first started speaking, the virtual hall of marketing and sales, this is assuming that marketing and sales are talking to begin with.
No, they're not. Yeah, no. Well, and yeah, which of these blind alleys would you like to go down? Because there's like you could. I'm full on rant mode in any one
I
of those
know.
directions. Whatever you want to go.
I thought, let's watch how we trigger Brent.
I think it's kind of blood sport with a lot of podcast hosts with me. It's like, let's see. What if I press this button here? What happens then?
Exactly. Brent's breakdown, 5 minutes. Here we go.
That's right.
No, I think you're right in that. And this back to the challenge. This is where we have to teach them because, and we hear this so often that they might be buying your solution or something like yours for the first time, but you deal with people like them every day. And so it really is incumbent upon us to teach them with some context on how to navigate both the buying process, the buying journey, but also, especially for me, I worked in complex sales for 20 years, like navigating their own internal systems. Like you have two challenges. And I think a lot of times we just have to help them get out of their own way.
I think that's right. I would agree. I was going to say largely, and that sounds passive aggressive. I would 100% agree with everything you just said. I might consider at least tweaking the language, and I'll get your reaction to this. So you use the word teach, like we need to teach them how to navigate their own buying journey. And for some reason, that word teach kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I think I would use the word guide. And it's like, what's the difference? Because so let me throw out what I think is the difference. You tell me whether you think I'm full of it, right? But there's this idea of teaching feels like I'm the expert. Like I am going to come into your organization. I'm going to tell you, here's the 3 people you need to talk to, and here's what you need to say to them, and here's how they need to agree. And by and large, that is in effect objectively what you're trying to do. However, positioning, I think, here is everything. So rather than saying, hey, I've been doing this for 20 years, and here's who you need to talk to, or I just did 5 of these deals, and here's how it's going to go wrong. I find positioning like something like, in working with other customers like you, one of the things we found is this can easily go off the rails when procurement gets involved, and they often get involved late and blow everything up. One of the things we've learned from them that you might consider is actually getting them involved early. Notice that's opposed to, I've been in this for 30 years, you need to get procurement involved, right? That feels more like teaching, although the best teachers don't teach like that, to be fair to teachers. But so I think we're saying the same thing, but I think it is posture means a lot, because in the world that we live in today, for someone to show up as the expert doesn't actually do very well, right? As opposed to the partner, the guide, the coach, the Sherpa, the it. So I've spent a lot of my time in the last couple of years thinking a lot about, so for the lack of a better thing to call it, Socratic selling or Socratic guidance, which is, if I can just put a framework around it. So in other words, here's the kinds of things you might worry about. Here's the typical people you might get involved in. I've learned that from others like you. So I'm connecting, as opposed to being the authority, I'm being the connector.
Hmm.
But then what I'm doing is I'm creating a framework around that buying journey. So I'm not mapping the buying journey step one, step two, step three, but rather I'm creating a framework. I'm chalking the pitch or chalking the field and saying, here are the general guidelines. You'll need to figure out what works best for you, so that ultimately it's the customer is making the decision rather than me giving them a decision. And I think that matters because, as I've been banging on about for a couple of years now, the thing we need to solve for ultimately is customers' confidence, not in us, but customers' confidence in themselves. And it stands to reason, if they want to feel confident in themselves, they got to feel like they own the decision, that they owned what they're doing. So all of that out of the single word teach. I don't know if you bought any of that, but
I,
it'd be interesting to get your thought.
first of all, I think language is very important. And I guess when I said it, I took it the way in which I teach, and the way I teach is guiding. So I do see what you're saying, because it does it, if done incorrectly, I feel it's very directive, and it could be abrasive to them, in that, like, that very rigid, like, you have to go this way, versus I'm sharing, past, like you said, we've worked with people like you in the past, and this is what we found, and this is the reason we think IT should be involved at this stage, because if not, so I definitely get it. And I think for those listening, absolutely, guide, Sherpa is a great word as well. And I love the co-creation, because I feel when they're part of it, and chalking the pitch is great, because it's still creating that structure, that left brain, the something to hold everything in. But there's still even part of that, because I think if they're not, then there's no ownership and there's no accountability. And so it's easy to go, oh, this, then we have just happy years, right? And so when they're agreeing to that, you're getting buy-in, and they're showing intent.
I totally agree. Yeah, so we're aligned on that. So the co-creation is a word we use a lot at Ecosystems, where I am now, which is this around defining value, which is, rather than me telling you what's valuable or valuable to you, or you telling me what's valuable to you, we sit down and have a conversation around it, and we put some options on the table, we explore them, and it's by we, I mean not just me and my senior decision maker, but the buying group, aligning them to each other so that they actually have a common vision. By the way, again, which of these alleys do you want to go down? But like, we have to remember, all this happens in the context of consensus creation, of group buying dynamics, right? So it's just like, I need to guide, when we say we need to guide the customer, as if that's a monolithic entity, right? But there's all those different people involved, and they've got different viewpoints, and they're trying to connect with each other. And so it's like, how can I help them create, again, a framework within which they can kind of guide themselves, as it were? That's starting to get a little, save me from myself. I think I just walked myself into a corner with my language, but broadly speaking, I think that's where we need to go.
Well, back to Challenger, I remember there was a line in there that said, as diversity of opinion, diversity increases, so does dysfunction. And I think, when you looked at, for me, it's 13 people now that make a decision. But when I was in corporate, the complexity was huge. And so you had to understand that most people were tasked to be here. They didn't want to be here. They were like, you sit on this committee, you make this decision, there's competing priorities. So how do you gain consensus? How do you understand what these individuals, what's it going to take to motivate them to come together and make, and ultimately agree on, first of all, the problem, that first step. And it's tough, because the more people you bring to the table, the more dysfunction you're getting.
100%. And when that last point, by the way, that's where a lot of my thinking has been lately. You mentioned this web series I put on LinkedIn and YouTube, published by Ecosystems, this video series called Brent's Breakdown. And I've talked about this in a couple of those episodes, one called, Losing to a Parking Garage. I can tell that story again if you want, or people can just go watch Losing to a Parking Garage. But the thing that's interesting to me is exactly what you just said, is that we spend so much of our time trying to convince our customer, that buying group, that we're better than the competition. So, like, look at all the features, benefits, speeds, feeds, efficiencies, whatever. Like, here's the 5 ways that we're better than the competition. And it turns out, more often than not, that what your customers are struggling to get agreement on is not you versus supplier A versus supplier B, but simply just, what the bleep should we even be doing in the first place? And so
Mhm.
I was in Denver a couple of weeks ago with a bunch of CEOs and GMs and heads of sales. And we're having this very conversation, and there was a GM there who said, we just lost a deal for that very thing. We were their number one choice, They wanted us, they saw us as better than the competition. They ultimately decided to go in a different direction, but the different direction wasn't supplier B. The different direction was we're going to solve a completely different problem altogether. And I looked at him and said, how's that feel to be the customer's number one solution to their number three problem? And he said, it doesn't feel very good at all. And that's where you wind up without that kind of guidance, I think.
But that's so important. I think, everyone says we have to most people don't acknowledge the problem in the first place, and they just jump in. And so then you're working, what are you anchoring this to? And that's when you commoditize yourself and they lose themselves. But the second step is acknowledge a problem, but prioritize. If the top three things you're working on is this number one, and I remember reading or I think I actually commented on one of those posts, but that's what's new is, yeah, we gained, acknowledgement that we have a problem, but we have 9 of them. And this one we're looking at solving in 2026. So if you don't ask that question and you're aligning all those resources, thinking, moving the probability up, and you're like, we're 2 years early for this one.
Right. Well, and that's what's crazy because you'll get agreement every step of the way, right? You'll have resonance, right? It's like, oh no, you are better than competition. We see how these features could help us. We totally see the potential ROI, and it's like, and you have them right to the finish point where they
Yeah.
say, however, this is a nice to have versus a need to have, or this is number 3 on a list of 2 things we can afford to do. So it's like it's like you won the battle, but you lost the war because you're
Mhm.
fighting the wrong enemy. And I think that was a very Marshall metaphor, but you kind of hopefully you went with me on
Yeah.
that one. But that is I think the real challenge is how do you get that buying group to agree that the problem your solution solves is the problem they need to solve in the first place? That's critical.
And so let's open that. How do you get that? How
I
you
don't
get
have no idea. Good luck. No, no. Well,
And we're done.
I, I don't. I just have bar charts. So I think this is part of where Challenger is still relevant, right? So Challenger is all about teaching customers about a problem or an opportunity that they didn't have. You've had Matt on your show before, Matt Dixon, sorry, co-author of the Challenger Sale, and he's talked a lot about if you just bang against status quo. Ultimately, at some point, customers are like, no, we get it. We need to change. It's just that they're scared to make that change. There's like diminishing returns of just beating up on the status quo. But there is a moment where there's like something in between those two things. It's like, no, I know I need to change. I don't want status quo. I need to go in that direction. But how do I prioritize that relative to the 10 other things where someone else has told me that status quo stinks, right? So it's like, it's kind of like me in my house here that I'm in Northern Virginia. Like my to-do list of 50 things I've got to do it's incredibly long, and every one of those is valuable and important, and the place is kind of a mess and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, I have a limited, so my limitation isn't money, it's time, but I still have a
Mhm.
limited resource, and so I have to make choices. And by the way, the other thing as if in this scenario I just mapped out off the top of my head, I'm the customer, I'm the buyer or the maker of the decision. What's really funny there is you're never really satisfied with anything you choose. It's paradox of choice, right? Because ultimately, and this I think same with customers. Like, okay, so I'm the number one solution to your number 3 problem, so we went and solved problem number 1, not problem number 3, but I'm still kind of thinking about problem number 3, and I kind of think about solution number 1 to problem number 3, and I kind of wish I had that. And so it's like nobody's ever happy anymore in this world, Karen. It's like we're all, it's all just kind of overwhelming, right? And this is like, and then someone says, okay, let's go on another buying journey. It's like I'd rather kind of die right now. I mean, this is just so awful. It's just you know what I mean? It's like it's kind of amazing to me sometimes that commerce still happens at all because it's not even scary. It's exhausting.
We're competing with solution 2 or death. Which one would you like? I'll take death.
I could go in a very dark humor place, but it's probably I not get emails, so I'm just gonna moving on. I'm just gonna step right around that one and keep going. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think when you look at adding complexity, it's just that's what we're doing, and there's already enough friction. But as salespeople, we have to look at the way in which we sell, and are we adding friction? And even just starting with the purpose, like why are we here today? What can we hope to get out of this call? Like at the end of the 30 minutes, where should we be so people feel that our fleeting commodity of time, that it's being managed well? And I think little things like that make a difference. But a bigger thing is when you can look at, why that number one problem versus number three, like how can you do some research on the company, have some business acumen, and understand like what are the 4 strategic initiatives that you're working on or corporate objectives? How can I align? And I did this my whole career. I'm like, if this was here, if I have this one little ball, what bigger ball can it go under that helps them achieve what they are fully measured on? So basically, you're getting 2 birds with 1 stone. And I feel that people are looking at it only from the puzzle piece. I have a puzzle piece, but take a step back and look and be a strategic partner. You can solve a whole puzzle, but you just have to do a little bit of homework.
I think that's right. I think there's actually not one but five dimensions to this. So there's objectives, like what are objectives, and that's kind of where you were at, right? And to your point, those objectives ultimately ladder up to higher level objectives until I guess you get all the way up to make tons of money for shareholders, because that's all we care about, capitalism, right? But the so there's objectives, but below objectives are the tactics, right? So okay, that's our objective, but there's 100 different ways we could go meet that objective. What are the one or two tactics we're going to choose to pursue in order to meet those objectives? And below tactics then are metrics. How are we going to measure our progress? And below metrics are targets. What is the right target? How will we know? It's like, what's the finish line? Have we set a finish line? Is it 20% improvement? Is it $30 million save? Whatever it is, like, because if you don't get agreement on the target, then it's like objective check, tactic check, metric right, but I think we're at a different target. Or the final one is so we got objectives, tactics, metrics, targets, and then timelines. And timelines is how long is it going to take. Every one of those altitudes, every one of those dimensions or levels it creates surface area for disagreement, surface area for misalignment, right? So in other words, when I kind of come up with the value of my solution, or the value, whether it's with a prospective customer, an existing customer, I put the ROI calculation on the table or whatever it is and say, here's all the money we saved you. I could debate that result at any one of those five levels, whether it's that's the wrong objective. No, it's the right objective, but we should have gone after that with a different tactic. No, right tactic, but I always use a different metric. No, right metric, but that's not the right target, and so on down the list.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting that buying group of 5 people, 10 people, 15 people, this is why it's so hard, right? Because this is why, not just hard for you to sell, it's hard for them to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's like this, it's like do you remember that? Was it the oh gosh, the Varanos Narrows Bridge or whatever, was that suspension bridge that it eventually shook itself to pieces? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? Just like from your
No.
high school physics class. All right. So anyway, Google it. Okay, so there's a suspension bridge, and it was poorly built. I think it was in the 50s, and the wind caught it, and eventually it created this wave, and the galloping Gertie, I think is what they called it. But the bridge started doing this, and eventually the waves. And what happened was that these waves started piling up on each other, and there was this critical moment where all the waves kind of met at the same point and stacked, and the bridge shook itself apart. That's a weird, but this, by the way, there's a quick glimpse into my brain and how it works, but it's all right brain metaphor picture stuff. But this is kind of what needs to happen in a B2B purchase. Is like, I've got all these different people, right? So I got, 5 to 10, 15 people. And then I got these 5 dimensions. So objectives, tactics, metrics, targets, timelines. And a purchase happens when those 5 to 10 people are aligned across those 5 dimensions in that magical moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least a purchase that they're happy with. And this is why I think people are so frustrated, not just with selling into this world, but being part of the buying side of this world, because that's, God, that's like so hard, right? It's so the question I think for us as sellers becomes, how can I possibly be involved in just trying to make all of that a little bit easier?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything I can do, whether it's guidance, whether it's information, whether it's frameworks, whether it's a tool, whether it's just conversations? I think that's got to be our primary posture across everything we do in sales. Is buying sucks. Excuse my language, but it does. Deciding sucks. It's just awful. And if this seems a little dark, I'm over the tips of my skis a little bit with the rhetoric here, but I think it truly is. And I know this because I've talked to thousands and thousands of people about it, and they're all exhausted. And can you be the one person who shows up and says, and then follows through with, let me see if I can just help you make this a little easier?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to because think about it, in that environment where you're exhausted, you're frustrated, you don't want to do this, and someone shows up and says, let me tell you about my features and benefits. It's like, are you freaking kidding me? Right? It's like that. No, you can't. No, just go away, delete, unsubscribe, just stop talking to me. Right? It's like, because you just made it worse. But if someone could show up and say, it's hard, isn't it? Empathy. Let me see if I can help. Okay, let's talk about that.
Mm-hmm. I wrote down empathy right there when you said that, but I think just showing intent, coming up and validating their feelings, unspoken, but you can pick up on the signals and the body language of the room or the virtual call and say, look, guys, I can tell that this is a hard decision, based on everything you have going on, all the competing priorities, and having done this before for many companies, I know it's hard. So I want to acknowledge that and just allow people to feel heard and validated. And then if you follow that with a pitch, you're going to get throat punched, as we said before. But like, just then lead with, how can I make it? And I think just showing your intent, provided that your desire to help them is greater than your desire to cash a commission check, right? And really, because when you feel that and you lead with it, they disarm. And it's a pattern interrupt because they're like, wow, this is actually different. They are trying to do something to make this easier. And I think where people are successful is we've all been consumers before, and we've all to some extent bought some kind of tech software. And for some of us, like I personally have gone through this. I've had the worst experience, which should have been probably a 2 week selling cycle. I was in with 6 months. And so I'm empathetic because nobody could help me see around the corner. Nobody had done this before. I had to get third parties to do APIs for me. They didn't even know what that was. So this all happened to me before I read The Jolt and knew and work like yours that knew indecision was there. And it's because it was an awful experience. Nobody was acknowledging the discomfort, the fear, the uncertainty, everything I was feeling, and they were pitching, and I'm like, you guys are making this worse. And so I know what that is, and I do everything to proactively get in front of it. And even if you haven't been through that, you don't have to. You still need to recognize this is where buyers are right now. Like you said, we're tired. Whether you have kids, whether you have busy things, everyone is so inundated, with everything. I think post pandemic, we have no free time. That if you can just make someone's life a little bit easier, that's like the bar's low to differentiate. That's going to make the difference.
I think that's right. I think what we're competing with is less fear, although that's certainly part. I think it's exhaustion, right? And it's
Yeah.
just, and it's a very human thing. I mean, human sales has always been about the humanity of it all, right? But there's something in my mind. Maybe it's just as I get older and just where my head goes with the research. But I'm so strongly gravitating to this very human aspect
Mm-hmm.
of commerce today, and just what it feels like to show up and try to make decisions in this kind of environment. I think that's where the empathy thing becomes really, really important. And just to be fair to customers, when I get this head of steam up and I start talking about it, I make it kind of sound like they're incompetent and don't know what they're doing. I think they're actually very competent. I think they're very smart people with really good intentions, trying really hard to do the right thing under time commitment pressures. And it's like, it's just hard, right? And then you got your kid failing trigonometry, and you got the other kid who's having drama with their friends at school, right? And it's like, and you look at this list of things you got, it's like, because that B2B buying, it doesn't happen in a vacuum of work, right? It happens in the context of all those people's individual lives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would imagine for a seller, this is why I don't sell. I'd rather just, it's like for those who don't know how to do it, they teach. So sign me up for that, right? So it's like, because it's like I got to worry about all that. If I'm a seller, I'm thinking like, that's not my job, right? My job was to tell people how great we are, but this is so much harder, isn't it?
It is. It is. And I think, like you said, if we can just make it a little bit easier, it makes the world a difference. And we're the pattern interrupt that they're looking for.
I think it's possible. The posture is there's two things. I think for me, in some ways, a lot of the posture kind of boils down to two things. So the first is kind of what we talked about already, which is the conclusion. So 20 years of researching B2B purchases and sales and buying and all that kind of stuff. What I've kind of come to conclude, and I mean this with a huge amount of respect and deference to customers, I mean that sincerely, but bottom line, customers don't know what they're doing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about everything, so whether it's the challenger work, buyer enablement, sense making, this idea of frame making that I talk about around value today, it's a customers don't really fully appreciate the best way to make money or save money. You need to challenge their thinking, show them new ways to make money and save money. So at the heart and soul of Challenger is this idea that customers, I used to joke, it's like, you need to go show up your customer and show them that they're wrong. Just don't say it like that, right? But but customers don't really know what's best for their company, or don't completely know. It's probably more fair. They don't know how to navigate their own purchase experience, so that's buyer enablement. They don't know how to make sense out of information, so that's sense making. They don't know how to define value because they don't know how to get aligned with each other, right? So, and again, that's smart, talented, professional people with good intentions trying to do the right thing. And the reason why they quote unquote don't know is because it's hard and it's complex and it's new and it's changing. And so the posture here, but you think about how we're trained in sales. We're trained in sales like the customer's always right, and the customer's needs comes first. We need to respond to whatever customers ask and make sure you do it quicker. The quicker, the better, right? So if customers want this configuration, often that configuration, right? Or if customers want more information, give them another white paper. Or if customers need to pull in this person for their opinion, you say, hey, tell me when I should talk to them, right? So my favorite one is discovery. Like I see this all over the internet right now. Is like first step is you need to go talk to your customers, ask them good questions to discover their top challenges. Like, what if they don't know their top challenges? They know their challenges, but which one's the top challenge? They're
Mm-hmm.
not. That goes back to what we were talking about before. They're all top challenges, right? It's there's this, like, if you start assuming that customers don't have 100% clarity on what to do, how to do it, when to do it, why to do it, you start opening up all these apertures, these opportunities for you to provide help
Mhm.
across all these dimensions, frame making around strategy, frame making around buyer processes, frame making around information, frame making around value and how value is defined, frame making around consensus creation. That's your opportunity, as opposed to just go find out what they know, because they're
Mhm.
not sure.
No, I agree, and I would say there's sophisticated and unsophisticated buyers, and just like those unsophisticated, they haven't bought it before, and so when we can pick up on, if we've had a discovery, if we've went through a certain phase and we're asking them to do something and you can see they're not ready, like, there's your indication that they haven't done this before, and so we can, even before that, how can we get in front of it and look for things, cues to really guide them, and also don't make them feel like they're inadequate. I think there's a tact and there's diplomacy here that we have to be mindful of, that even sharing context of why we're providing this. And the whole thing is we want them to achieve their goal, but we want them to avoid these kind of landmines that other customers have fallen into as a result, because they probably haven't bought our solution. And the biggest thing I see is people think, when you get these emails, you're like, thoughts, why didn't you get back to me? It's like, you're not the only thing I'm working on. Like, are you kidding me? Like you said, you have kids, you have other things, and they're just like, I emailed you 24 hours ago, and you're like number 94 on my list. Like, and so I think it's also, we have to know where we fit in their life, and even if we are the top priority, like, things, it's never on our timeline. And so I think we have to be mindful with, and part of when you went through the objectives and the metrics and the timeline, what is a reasonable timeline? And ask. I think what happens is we're afraid to ask these questions. And the more clear we are on this, and as you said, it's an opportunity to go back and continue to do a toll gate or check in at each time and say, are we still aligned here? And even push back and say, who would push back here? Like, what's going to prevent us from moving to the next, and really be the devil's advocate and start poking, looking for holes. Because if they've never done it before, they're going to go, oh, let's go ahead. Hang on a minute. These are the three, like my husband, every time he says something, he goes, the problem that's going to arise right here is this. Like, before he says anything, he's like, this is what you're going to expect to see in terms of a problem. But what's wrong with that? And let them start thinking, okay, because if they've never done this, you're priming them to go, what else could possibly go wrong? Oh, you know what? John should be in this meeting, and help them so that we're teaching them, or guiding them. Gotta be careful about
It's
what
all
I
good.
say.
Yeah, it's all good.
But I think that's going to give them the confidence at the end of it. So when their name is on DocuSign, it's not like, ooh, it's like, damn right it is. We've gone through this. We've gone through every milestone, and we are very certain that we have done our due diligence to confidently make a decision.
100%. And they think, well, like, where's the well, actually, let me back up, and I'll take a running start at this. There's a company called Expedient in the cloud computing business and cloud storage and everything else. It's like, you just don't know what they do, so you say they're in the cloud business, and everyone goes, "Oh, of course, right?"
Oh,
Um,
that's what they do.
but the CEO of Expedient is a friend of mine. I've gotten to know over the years as a client, became friends. His name's Brian Smith. And Brian was the head of sales for many years and was a chief strategy officer. Is now the CEO, and it's Brian with a Y. Brian's brilliant. He's flat out just brilliant. He's a really smart guy. But he has this quote, and I share it with permission because I asked him for it. He tells his team all the time, and now his entire company, our job is to help our customers make the best decision possible in as little as our job is to help customers make the best decision they can in as little time as possible.
Hmm.
That's our job. So my role is to help you make a decision that you feel good about, that you feel confident in, and that's it. And someone will
Hmm.
say, but Brian, what happens if they choose the competition or choose the status quo? And he says, well, that's the second part of the statement, in as little time as possible. Because if we're
Yeah.
going to choose someone else, if I'm going to lose, I want to lose early. But
Hmm.
more than anything else, I want to be the one that helped you feel good about your decision.
Hmm.
Because even if I don't win this time, I'm going to be the one you call next time, right? Because I'm the
Absolutely.
one that makes you feel good. And Karen, this to me, I will get your thoughts on this, because to me, I told you, it's like everything comes around to humanity.
Hmm.
For me, at least lately, I think this is no different than making friends in high school or dating or marriage. It's like, because it's very human. Is like the people that I want to work with, the people I want to be with, the people I want to spend time with, and I build relationships and friendships with, are the ones not that I feel good about. Like, oh, I love you, but rather, I love me when I'm with you. Do you see what I'm
Yes.
saying? It's
Oh, I
it's like
totally do.
it's and we don't always say that out loud, but that's, I mean, this is all Cialdini stuff. It's Robert Cialdini in his book
Yes.
Influence, right? It's like it's all about this human psychology of, I like you because I like you, but I also like you because I like me when I'm around you. Do you see
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And
I
that's
totally do.
just like, that's a human thing, and how you build friendships and marriages and all sorts of things. It's how you can build business too, which is, it's like every time we work with Karen and her team, we just feel better about the decisions we make on behalf of our business. And they may say that out loud, they may never say that out loud, but they feel
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
And that creates what's called a value exchange. This is all Cialdini stuff, right?
Yeah.
The value exchange is, I will pay you, I will this is, now it's an interpretation of Cialdini, to be fair to him, but I will repay you with my business
Mhm.
for something that you gave me a value, which is, I feel better about me when I'm around
Mhm.
you. And that's
Mm.
worth paying for. Isn't that crazy? It's
I
so interesting.
But it's so true, and I think some people might not even be able to label it or know what it is, but they're like, it's that's when you said it's a feeling, you're like, it's energy, right? You're like, I just like the way I remember when I was younger, we'd always go to Europe, and I would come home, and I'm like, "I wanna be Euro Karen again." Like, I wanna, and
I
I
like
just
that version of me.
I
Right.
do,
Totally.
I do, but,
Right.
like, who even think about your friends, like, who's attentive, who d practices I have a girlfriend, she's such a great active listener, she always asks me questions, she makes me feel so good about myself because she's focused on me, and 60% of conversations, we wanna talk about ourselves. So knowing that and knowing that, we feel that way, same thing, like, how can we be selfless, and how can we really create that reciprocity that's gonna come back to us? And like you said, which I 100% agree with, is that if I can help you make a decision confidently and it's not with me, I've still done a job. I've still done a good job because I firmly believe, and it's come back to me so many times. I get a referral, so it will always come back. But if you don't do that, then it shows you were never out to help in the first place. You're only out for yourself.
That's right. And in fact, this is how most of us, I think, again, going back to friendships and marriage, this is, I think, how a lot of us operate. I'm raising my hand because we're all human. We all do this, right? So I'm not like trying to call anyone out, but we tend to focus on ourselves. Like, I want you to think differently about me. I'm just, watching my kids go through high school, middle school right now. It's like, what will this group of friends think about me if I wear
Mhm.
this or say this or do this, right? And it's no different in sales. It's like, we think we grow up and become mature, but it's like, do you like my features? Do you like my benefits? Do you like my speeds? Do you like my feeds? Right? It's like, it is, we're so do you like my brand? Do you like my experience? Is it frictionless? Am I frictionless enough for you? Right? It's like, we want it. And so everything we do is so focused on customers' perceptions of us, and all
Mhm.
with good intention. Do they like our brand? Are we a trusted advisor? I mean, oh my God, that's like on the pantheon of important things to do in sales, is become a trusted advisor. Think about it. It is 100% oriented to customers' perceptions of us. Do they trust us, right? And it's like, how about if we take all that and put it over here,
Mhm.
not away, just put it on hold for a minute, just set it over here, and let's focus just on, how can we help customers think better, more positive things about them? Because if we can fix that, this will happen automatically. And that's
Mhm.
not what most of us do. And it's not how most of us are coached or trained either. It's like, well, did you say this about us? Did you convince
Mhm.
them of our value? And it's like, just don't lead with value, lead to it. That's
Mhm.
kind of it's like Challenger all over again, isn't it?
It's so important, but it's so right. And I think about leaders, and when they're pushing this, did you do this? It's like you have to model the behavior. Think about a sales leader. If they can genuinely ask and care about, Brent, how was your weekend? Like, I know you had this, you're going to the cottage the weekend, and your son was, getting his boat license. Like, how did that go? Did he pass it? And really caring and making it about you. Like, you're going to want to tell him more. There's going to be trust and all these other great things, but they're not doing it. And I think when you said when
Like,
we're
for example, like right now I feel totally inadequate because I don't have a son, I don't have a cottage, and I don't have a boat. Other than that, you nailed it. It's like, oh, I'm not worthy. Crap,
you
I'm
can
supposed to have a cottage by now, aren't I? She probably thinks I have a cottage, doesn't she? Oh,
you
geez.
failed. You failed.
Yeah.
Um, but just what you said about all those, when we're leading with ourselves. And I think and the need to be liked. We as humans, we crave acceptance, but there's a bit of insecurity there. And it's like we need validation. Even I have a 6-year-old, and I will post something. She goes, "Mommy, how many likes did that get?" And I said, "We don't need to be concerned with that." But think about it. Even these vanity metrics. It's like it takes away from why we're actually doing it. So I think when you can be selfless and truly just go back to what you said, like, if we sum this up, I always say B2B is H to H, human to human, and just say, like, what questions can I ask? What stories can I tell? insights can I share that is going to make you feel good about yourself?
Yeah, about
Without
yourself because
About
I
them, not
right,
me.
exactly, because it's human to human, but let's face it, we all screw up human to human all day, every day. Do you know what I mean? So it's one thing to say it's human to human, but like, okay, so as a result of what lessons can we learn from when human relations work and are
Yeah.
functional that we can transpose here? Because God knows we have lots of lessons of how to make them non-functional, and I think those are the exact same lessons we're carrying over. And it sounds like I'm on a soapbox or a high horse. I'll raise my hand and say, look, I screw this stuff up all the time, both on the human side and on the commerce side, because this stuff is hard. And it
Mhm.
takes a certain commitment and it takes a certain level of risk appetite to put yourself out there the way that we're talking about, right? It's like, you want me to lead with the product? Like, I just did a client meeting just a couple hours ago where the coaching I got internally from my colleagues, God love them. I love them. I respect them. I said, be sure you mention this, this, and this about us. And I did the call. I didn't mention any of those things. I said,
Mhm.
and then they got him. He said, but you didn't mention this and this. You ran out of time. So I didn't run out of time. I did that on purpose. I said, that will
Mhm.
come back to us. And again, but it's like, it's so strong, this desire to solve for people's perception of us. And it's so even on the human to human side. And this is why I think this is truly an opportunity for differentiation, because a lot
Mhm.
of people won't be able to do this because it's hard.
Mhm.
And that's I think I don't know how long this window of differentiation will be open. This window of opportunity for differentiation, whether this your challenger, that window was open for about 12, 15 years, and now
Mhm.
everyone's trying to be a thought leader, and so it's really hard to be a challenger and be differentiated today. Not because people are doing challenger, but people are producing insights more, like watered down insights. But so if you but you want to stand out, I think this is the way to stand out. But it's hard when you got quarterly metrics. You got, I want to go to Cancun, right? I got my coach and my coach's coach and my boss's boss telling me to do this other thing. It takes a certain amount of willpower to stand up to all that and then do what I don't know what's right, because that feels like that other thing's is wrong, like you're a bad person. It's rather it's just like what seems to work.
What I'm hearing there and what I teach is your purpose. And so, like, your why. And I think when you can align to that, that's a differentiation. Because even you think about the way in which we buy in the limbic versus the neocortex part of the brain, like we have to align with emotion. And when we say, and even Matt's back to Matt's work, the valuation problems, they don't know, they see green and they see red logo, that's all. But if I can share a bit of my purpose in the reason why I went into sales, why this company really attracted me, all of a sudden I create emotion and I'm different and I'm connecting with them on an emotional level. And perhaps there's something similar in that story, but it allows me to stand out. And even if they're going through their vendor list and there's 6 of them, they're like, remember that girl that came in and she told us that she had a horseback riding accident and that's why she now works for this orthopedic company or whatever. That's different, and so I think when you know why you do what you do, a few things happen. You stand out, but you're also, you're connected to the purpose, and so you're not so commission breath, you're just the true desire to serve and help, and you're not salesy because 'cause you're like, "I wanna help you because this helped me,"
Yeah,
it's just this
I
level of
totally agree.
passion.
Well, now that we're 40 minutes in, we'll open a massive can of worms. It's probably a bad idea, but I've been thinking about this a lot lately too. Is maybe this is volume two, and we'll get together and have a second one of these. But it's around incentives and alignment of incentives, and I think one of the challenges that most of us have to overcome in sales is the fact that, at least whether true or not, customers perceive our incentives to be massively misaligned. It's like, I know you get paid more if you manage to sell me something, and as a
Mhm.
result, I don't trust you. Or at least
Yeah,
my like I'm leading with a lack of trust, right?
yeah.
So there's one way to fix that, by the way, is completely change comp structure for sales. And I've gotten in massive arguments with the sales profession about that. And that's like third rail type stuff. So that's a different conversation for a different time. I always joke there's two topics you can't mention to sales leaders without, like, there's two topics if you mention to sales leaders, you kiss an hour conversation goodbye in a 4 hour meeting. One is comp and the other one's CRM. So all you got to do is say compensation, and the whole like room explodes into debate, and it's like nothing else happens. But to your point, I'll bring this around to something pithy, hopefully, maybe, is it's the reason why what you just said I think matters so much, Karen, is because that leading with your authentic self, and just because you have to find ways to overcome the deficit of trust that you're automatically starting with in sales, which is a perception of misaligned incentives on from your customer. And that, I mean, you're starting on your back foot. You just are, because just the way that the sales profession is operated. And so that's, I think, something that people tend to forget. Now, I often think that sales would be so much easier it's kind of like in the United States, at least, the big box retailer for electronics called Best Buy. And Best Buy, the retail assistants on the floor of the store, they wear blue shirts, so they're often referred to as blue shirts. And I don't know how many years it was. Probably, I was going to say 5. I think it's probably more years ago now. It's pre-pandemic, but they changed the entire comp structure of the blue shirts on the floor at Best Buy to be uh, non-incentive comp. So in other words, I don't get a 10% for selling you this TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I went from never going to Best Buy to going
Yeah.
there all the time, because it's like, I just trust you to just give me information, because there's no win in it for you individually to sell me something I don't want. So I that perception of incentives being misaligned is gone, and it just makes me so much more open to going to get help from them. So I don't know what to do with that. I've been thinking a lot about that lately, though. I don't, look, for most sales reps, they're takers, not makers on their comp structure. It just is what it is. And I'm sure they all want to get the, 6-figure kicker and go to Cancun at the end of the year. So they're not be the ones that, like, say, I don't need that extra comp.
Yeah.
But I think we just have to process, like, what does that do for us when we show up, knowing that we're on our back foot of misaligned incentive, perception
Mm-hmm.
of misaligned incentives with our customer?
Mm-hmm. You know the book Dan Pink, To Sell Is Human? And I used this word cloud that he used, and it's basically they asked, "What's the first word you think of when you hear the word sales?" And so it was the larger the word was the most respondents. It was yuck, pushy, difficult, and then the other one was, "What image do you see?" And it was used car salesman, man in suit, and pushy. And so I always start every talk by, the chips are stacked against us. This is the perception of people already. So knowing that, the intentionality we have to show up with has to be off the charts, because they're expecting snake oil here. And so when we can completely differentiate ourselves and start building trust, start disarming, start storytelling, start, if you've done a little activity, the other person's perspective, like what 3 to 5 questions are they going to have, what objections, and lead with them. All of a sudden they're disarmed and they're like, holy cow, you get me. Like, you are different. But people just run, they're not taking that 5 minutes to really consider their audience's perspective, how things have changed, how they make a decision, how they're influenced. What's their level of indecision? All these things that would frame their questions, their conversation completely to be others focused. And the other person would disarm and start saying, holy cow, they're telling, they're open, and the audience is going to say, what is it you do? Like, there's a level of curiosity there, because this has never been done to them before. Usually it starts with a pitch, and then you have the invitation to actually share your value prop.
100%. I totally agree with you. Now, here's what'll happen, and I love sales enablement people, and broadly speaking, some of my best friends are sales enablement. But what'll happen is, like, their job is to now scale what you just said, capture that, bottle it, and export it to the core performers, as we used to say at CEB, right? So now I got to scale it. So I put in a training manual, and I put a series of activities around it, and I teach you to do that as a rote exercise, because to approximate it, and it never works, right? Because there's something that has to be. This is where I think, again, I keep coming back to, I think this is the best opportunity for someone to truly set themselves apart as a sales rep, because, or as a seller, as a sales professional, is because it's actually just taking the sales part out and just show up as a human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just show up, and with empathy, knowing that buying sucks. Again, excuse my
Mm-hmm.
language. I don't know if that's not
Mm-hmm.
that strong a language, but you get where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
And just know that, like, they're struggling not with you. They're not struggling with the trust for you. I mean, there's a little bit that we just talked about, but what they're
Mm-hmm.
really struggling with is, like, they're exhausted and they don't want to
Yeah.
do this thing. And if you could be the one that shows up, makes it easier, man, you're different.
Yeah. Okay, that's just mic drop. And we're out. No, I think that's great. And I think everyone is, as you mentioned, we're tired. We have so many things on our plate, competing priorities. And part of the reason we don't get back to people is because you forget. And so some people, again, not going to open anything up, but when we're following up and there's a persistence there, so for the right person, I'm thankful for it, because I'm like, Jesus, that got buried, and then I had to drive someone to soccer, and then I had to do this, and I'm like, thank you for actually following up. So I feel also, if you know your client well, or your prospect well, and you know you can help them because you've helped others, stay on them.
Yeah.
Like,
I
don't.
used I used to tell my colleagues at Gartner and CB, I used to tell them all the time. I said, look, I said, I apologize in advance, but I'm going to need you to remind me of everything that you asked me to do at least 5 times. And
Yeah,
I'm sorry that I'm that guy. I'm sorry that I
yeah,
shouldn't, it's like, and it always was embarrassing. It frankly was, like, if I were a true professional, I would not need that. But this is the way my brain works, the way my life's going, because I'm incompetent. I need that. And I'm sorry, but at the same time, I give you full green light to do it.
yeah,
And please do it.
yeah.
But it's different when a sales rep climbs their way to the top of your inbox. It's like, oh God, go away.
Well,
So it's
even when you say bubbling it up, if you just didn't say that, I would actually thank you for it. But the minute you say bubbling it up, I'm like,
Yeah.
now it's done. Even though I need your system,
Now
we're
I
done.
hate you.
Now I hate you. You're dead to
I'm
me.
gonna throat punch you.
Or line of the podcast, throat punch. I will throat punch. It's so bad.
So I have no idea if we said anything of interest or value, but it was fun to chat.
But we
So
had
there you
fun.
go. Right. That's all that matters. Remember, it's like I just like to make myself laugh. Everything else is gravy.
Table for one.
Always. Forever alone.
Oh man. Well, listen, if we were to just wrap this up or to summarize, what we shared about today was really, bringing that human element, showing up as our authentic self, and just recognizing everyone's busy, there's competing priorities, and just even leading with that and just saying, I know, we have tons of things on our plate, so that there's that acknowledgement and awareness of where we're at. And I think when you do that, you can feel people's shoulders just come down a little bit, and they're like, oh my God, someone's actually listening to me, and they can see and feel what's going on. And that empathy alone is the opening, or the springboard in which we can begin from.
I think that's right. The one hesitation we talked about prior to coming on the air, but the is the showing up with your true authentic self. I dispute it and I don't. I mean, it's yes, but I think what customers really want is to show up with an approximation of their true authentic self. In other words, it's your point about mirroring. It's like, because I'll tell you what, as you've already found this out in the last hour, nobody wants me to show up with my true authentic self. Like, which version, first of all, right? But like I find the more authentic I become on these podcasts, the less people want that. So I have learned, like, that stuff needs to be put in a bottle and bottled up, sealed, and buried deep inside you, and then life becomes a race between when the bottle explodes and you die. So but that's what happens. That's why no one wants to be my authentic self. It's too dark, right? So what they really want is again, don't solve for you at all. It's a very selfless act. Solve
Yeah.
for their perception of themselves and
Mm-hmm.
help them feel better about themselves. And so that's a slight minor rearticulation of what you said, but other than that, ditto.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. I've been corrected a few times. That's great. Thank you.
Sorry.
No,
I'm a jerk.
no, you're not. It's all, I love different perspectives. Sometimes the language it makes, again, my perception, your perception different, but I think it's a great reminder is to, when we're speaking with our prospects, that language might not resonate. So that's a great reminder. So I'm thank you for that.
And I'm often wrong. My projection bias is always a play. But yeah, so the language thing comes. I'm a trained linguist. So before I got into this racket, I was a professor of linguistics at Michigan State, and so I've played with language for a good 15 years of my career, and I still do. So I tend to over-index on language. It's
No, I
bad.
think it's,
Yeah.
and then another podcast is the language, and the stories we tell ourselves, and that's just opening something completely different.
Oh dear.
At the end of it.
What, yeah, I'm at the bottom of the list of guests you want to have on that show. Nobody wants to know that stuff. Yeah. Not for me.
If folks would like to learn more about you, connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So I am. You can find me on LinkedIn under my profile, and that's where you'll find Brent's breakdown as well. We also post it at Ecosystems, and ecosystems.io is our website, and you'll find on the Ecosystems LinkedIn. The other thing, Karen, I would tell you is we have a pretty large and active community of value professionals and people interested in customer value, called the Customer Value Community at Eco. And if anyone's interested in joining, just shoot me a note on LinkedIn or on email. And it's badamson@ecosystems.io, and we'll get you set up.
Thank you, Brent, for your time, your humor, and all your insights. Thanks so much.
All right. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.